Tara, welcome. I'm so glad to have you here. It was such a pleasure to have you join us for the Mechanism Institute deep dive in Paris and to learn everything you've been doing in the space, both pursuing a PhD in labor within the blockchain space, specifically around exit to community, which we can dive into in more detail here, but also your journey. Like you've done incredible research. A long time working in research at IOTA Foundation, BlockchainGov, you're a contributor to Meta Governance Project, and then you're a researcher at Other Internet, which I think is super interesting as they're sort of exploring working and social security in decentralized organization in this new world of the internet. So like so much to dive into. And before we do, I would love to hear where you're calling in from and where you're usually based. And what is your main focus these days? What is keeping you lit up?
I'm currently calling in from cold and almost winter Berlin, usually based between Berlin and Paris. I don't know why I chose Berlin for these months, but yes, here we are. So as you said, I'm currently doing a PhD, and what keeps me up at night is this concept of exit to community, which is really a question of how do we transition founder and investor-led startups in the digital platform economy into something that is community owned and governed alongside cooperative principles and values. So that outcome could be a platform co-op. It could also be a DAO. I'm particularly looking at the DAO case or the Web3 sort of scenarios and trying to figure out like what is the knowledge and tools that we need to build and how do we build them to foster that transition from A to B with the belief that, you know, we need to change something around how our data and money flows in this digital platform economy. But to do that, it's not enough to just throw blockchain at everything. We need to kind of help organizations on that way.
Worked a lot in consulting around the digital economy, around financial planning schemes with something like Cube, really supporting this idea of like emerging market multinational companies. Like I think it's so interesting that this seems like it's really been a through line of like the economics and value creation mechanisms, and then how that translates into like society, especially with the digitization of our world, basically. How did you get inspired by this topic in the first place? Do you remember like, you know, where and why this became such a burning like platform for you?
So I think they're like with that sort of career thread, it maybe like for me, it starts a little bit with a curiosity that I started in my undergrad with like quite a while ago, which was like, I want to understand money and the economy because I think we need to fix it. And then very naively, I started to, you know, do that and study that and realized, oh, I'm not really learning the sort of things that I thought I would at university, and there doesn't seem to be an easy way to fix it, and became super interested in this idea of heterodox economic theories. So anything that is not your standard textbook might be environmental economics, feminist economics, could be socialism, could be Austrian economics. So all these sorts of theories and ideas. But something that I didn't like or, you know, that kind of frustrated me back then was that even though these were cool ideas and concepts, it was very hard to try them out, or, you know, like Soviet Union kind of examples that when we tried them out, they didn't go as intended. And then I came across Bitcoin or crypto towards the end of my undergrad. And the one thing that really fascinated me about that was the idea or the opportunity that arose in terms of like experimenting and really trying out at scale economic experiments, be they of monetary form, but also, you know, organizational experiments through open source technologies and with the voluntary community. So this idea of experimentation, I think for me has always been key. And then I wasn't sure if it was legit. I thought maybe it's still a scam. So I went down this other path, which was very much social startups such as Cube, but also the public sector in Germany and public sector consulting. And again, here, I didn't feel like I felt there was a lot of ideas and PowerPoints that we're presenting to each other and things we were trying out. But again, this sort of hands-on, what can we do? And also looking from that perspective, really the big problem that for me emerged was maybe not just how to fix money, but this idea of the digital economy and what is happening with our data, what is happening with working conditions in the gig economy. Why don't I, as an active user of a social media platform, get a share in that revenue, et cetera, et cetera. So this kind of, I think, emerged as the problem statement for me, and crypto or blockchain and open source technologies was more the approach, and kind of like a passion for experimenting and trying things out, and also a belief that we gain the most useful, or we gain very useful knowledge, not in building complex theory and models, but in doing things in the real world, and kind of reflecting on them and making sense of them in hindsight. And I thought that was such a great space. So for me, exit to community as this idea and pathway towards a more equitable digital platform economy, and trialing that with open source technologies such as blockchains, kind of fitted together. And then I became a little obsessed and met a bunch of people that I thought was really inspiring. And yeah, now I'm stuck.
I love it. And you mentioned like Nathan Schneider, who had coined the concept or the word exit to community in 2019. So it's still like a relatively new concept, especially as we're thinking about the explosion of these digital autonomous or decentralized autonomous organizations, or DAOs, which really started to blow up and become more prominent in our world around 2019, 2020. I'm so curious, like, what is really standing out to you as like a plausible, actionable solution that like an everyday leader could implement in their organization?
The idea that if you want to have a community, that a lot of anything that builds a platform that, you know, or that aspires to have a community that is not just a service provider, like my traditional bank maybe is not building a community. I'm just a customer, and, you know, using this company, which is a different case to something like Twitter or Instagram or Lens, or I'm not sure what. And the organizations that you build around them, they matter, right? So especially when you're thinking about communities, communities evolve when humans have relationships amongst each other and towards this organization. They have some sort of shared purpose. And relationships actually fundamentally depend on trust, right? Like, if we want to have fruitful and long-term and sustainable, enduring relationships, we need to build some sort of trust amongst the members of that community. And there's a strange idiosyncrasy of us wanting to build communities in Web3, but using these seemingly trustless technologies. Now, I don't think that, you know, blockchain is trustless, and there's been a lot written about it. However, what it does is it supplements a lot of the vulnerability that we usually would have when we have to enter trusted relationships with somebody else, through mechanisms of confidence, would be like the academic way to put it, which just means it's very predictable how, you know, what you can do with the token. You're an pseudonymous sort of token holder of a DAO. You get to vote. The proposal will execute according to XYZ rules. And then, you know, the smart contract will autonomously distribute funds. And then if I don't like it, I can just rage quit. All of these types of mechanisms that have very much evolved as a status quo are great for some cases, but they're not maybe the best at building the sort of trusted relationships that we do need if we want to build sustainable communities online. And it's just, to me, it's it's a weird contradiction that I think is useful to reflect on more consciously when building a project, but also structuring the organizations around them, and thinking through this sort of transition of like, we don't want to be just the founder and investors making all the decisions, but we want this community to take long-term ownership and responsibility. Well, then that community also needs to see the value in that. And that depends in part on these trusted relationships that they build amongst each other. And designing for trust in Web3 organizations and DAOs, I think, is a whole organizational design space we've not paid that much attention to. And I'm curious what we can do sort of to that end, and hopefully, you know, it'll make DAOs even more fun than they were, at least in, you know, the past couple of years.
How important do you feel like it is that the DAO has a really clear source of value, and then that fractionalized ownership and governance is connected to the value. Have you seen any good examples of how that works in action?
Yeah, I mean, maybe just like towards that, the question of money and why also exit to community is an interesting thing, because it's quite pragmatic in its approach, in terms of saying, okay, first, we know that, you know, platform businesses do require a bit of bootstrapping. In the beginning, it's good to build network effects. It's good to have a small team making decisions to be able to pivot depending on what you learn in the market. And kind of my take is, and also very much echoing something that Camille Canan from Apiary always keeps emphasizing, is that these organizations need to build, if it's around a business, right, you need to build some sort of value in the market before you decentralize. So that's maybe a little bit where the money comes in. And I do believe that in many instances, it's useful to do that as a smaller team upfront. That product and service and value, you know, can always be expanded upon. But then when you transition towards community ownership and governance, there is something at stake. I do also think maybe that money is one of those cases where human relations and trust doesn't always work, and where it's good to have some measures of confidence and employ these sort of technologies that we've developed. But that doesn't mean that's all there is. And no organization is just about money. You go to the office and do all sorts of things. So
it's such a good. What are you seeing in the market, or in terms of people or projects, when they are moving to this concept of exit to community or community ownership? What like tools, tactics, strategies are working?
One of the things that we have seen, for example, with Gitcoin and Maker, is this sort of a little bit more careful approach of building something and then progressively decentralizing, as we say in Web3. I think there's something to be learned from traditional cooperative conversions that we've seen, like in the non-digital economy, where there's some best practices, like, for example, founders don't just, you don't just drop a token and people disappear, but in many cases, there's legal contracts structuring transition periods. There's documents, or again, legal documents sort of like outlining the vision, the goals, some principles that, cannot be crossed. So kind of anchoring those early ideas in some sort of way. We've seen a lot of constitutions pop up. I think that's one mechanism that projects can draw on. So kind of how to structure that transition period. We've seen a lot of founders now with Gitcoin and Maker, for example, return after a period of decentralizing. How do we make that a little less murky and chaotic? Maybe that's, I think, a good question and something to think about when transitioning a project. And then also, how do we ensure that the core goals and sort of animating purpose of that organization is retained as, a larger stakeholder group, or the community takes ownership and control? Because people also sometimes seem confused around what this project they're in is actually all about, even though it's fun. It's like, what are we doing here?
Have there been any people or projects that have successfully exited to community yet? And if so, like, what does that look like? What does it look like?
I mean, I think the first question is, what is successful in that space? I do think Gitcoin and Maker are success cases for now. Also some of the older DeFi protocols, like synthetics and whatnot. I think there's a lot of exit to community sort of success projects that we can look at more in the platform cooperativism world, non-Web3 style. And some people have brought up like Patagonia as a type of exit to community. So companies like that are also spaces to look into when trying to make sense of what does this mean, and is this a success?
So interesting. And what do you feel like would be your hot take, or maybe like controversial opinion that you hold that maybe others might not agree with you on, of where the future is going? Like, where do you think the next 5-10 years goes in the space of platform cooperativism or exit to community, and like what we might see happen?
So I think maybe a hot take is something that I wrote about a while back with Rolf Höfer, who's in Metacartel Ventures and also a researcher, is this idea around isomorphism, which generally just describes long-term development across industries, not just Web3, but it could be the consulting sector, it could be healthcare, it could be education, what have you, that over time, organizations start to resemble each other and become more homogenous. And sort of, I think the hot take for me is that just by using different technologies, Web3 is not automatically going to look any different than Web2. And if we want to have substantial change, then there's a lot more that we, need to sort of disentangle, be it our professional socialization, if I am socialized in big tech and consulting and this and that, I have certain ways of working, for example, that I will bring back into a DAO. If we want to change the way we work and see DAOs as a future of work, for example, we need to get other people in with different experiences and background and let them sort of take a leading role in shaping these experiences. We also, something around diversity, which is just exactly, if we're predominantly uplifting European and North American privileged voices that have had a key role in shaping the technology sector previously, it is likely, just because of how what we know and our values and who we are, that we might shape similar experiences. So I think my hot take is, just using a fundamentally different set of technologies is not going to mean we're creating a fundamentally different digital economy.
What advice would you give to somebody really starting to investigate and work in this new digital economy?
I think one thing that's always interesting and important is both, on the one hand, personally, to just use the technologies that you're interested in, or I do my best, but I don't have deep technical expertise. And the closest I get to understanding how stuff works is to try them out. And try and gain an understanding there. And I think that's something that over time has also become a little bit of my bullshit radar, to ask people, are you actively using this technology that you're advocating for, writing about, and whatnot? I think this is also in the research area, to be honest. I think it's very important that when academics investigate Web3, that they do actively try and participate and use and deal with the messiness that is all the tech that we've created. So yeah, I'm a big fan of just trying things out and also making sure that others who you look up to or want to learn from are doing the same, because that's usually a good source of knowledge. And then I don't know, I think it's we develop all our own heuristics. I think it's good to trust intuition around things that seem too grandiose and you really don't understand them. Well, maybe you don't have to. Maybe that's going to pass. And but also to just meet people, because I think it's some of the loveliest people I've ever encountered was through this space. And yeah.
And how can we follow your research? So as you develop this and you finalize your thesis, and also just, I know you're constantly researching and publishing your ideas online. How can we keep in touch with the latest?
I'm not doing the best job, but I really try and share stuff on Twitter, which is at mpg_dd. We also, from the main research project that I work with, BlockchainGov, led by Primavera de Filippi, try and share everything through the website and weekly newsletters. So I think that's a good first go-to.
Amazing. Well, Tara, thank you for joining today. It's really cool to hear how you're pushing things forward in the exit to community thinking and space. And we'll definitely be following along as you share all the best practices and things that you uncover along your journey.
Thanks a lot, Alana.